Hi, I'm Colin, and this is Spaceflight Made Simple. So, a while ago I did a few videos on the Space Shuttle, specifically talking about its development and how it worked. Today I want to focus on what the Space Shuttle did right, its achievements during its remarkable 30 years of service. But if you enjoy what you see here today, head down below and hit that subscribe button. I'm going to try to upload at least once a week, covering topics from across spaceflight, current events, history in spaceflight, anything. So the shuttle served for 30 years, and it did a lot of really incredible things during that time. Not only did it carry one of the largest crews capable of being launched in a single launch in history, but it launched a lot of payloads that were very, very scientifically significant. So while the shuttle may have been limited to low Earth orbit, it definitely had an impact on the history of spaceflight. So starting at the very beginning, the Space Shuttle was the first reusable spacecraft. Now, while it may not have been as easy or cheap to reuse as originally planned, it was still reusable nonetheless. And as a result of being reusable, the launches were able to happen more frequently. In the days before the Challenger incident, during the early 80s, the Space Shuttle would fly 5, 6, 7 times a year. Now those numbers would come significantly down when the shuttle program returned following the hiatus it had after the Challenger incident, but still in the very early days it did achieve a very, very high launch rate. The shuttle's large crew complement allowed it to carry a lot of people that wouldn't normally be able to go into space. Because one launch could put 7 people in orbit, unlike the Apollo program, a lot of the people that flew on the shuttle were civilians. They weren't test pilots or military aviators. On top of that, the shuttle allowed us to very easily fly international partners and astronauts from other nations that maybe don't have the capability of putting people into space. So while the shuttle did some pretty impressive stuff in the 80s, it really shined in the 90s. First off, the shuttle launched one of the most notable space telescopes in history, the Hubble Space Telescope. The size and complexity of the space telescope made it really something that was only doable with a spacecraft like the shuttle. The shuttle allowed them to put Hubble into orbit in the first place, and Hubble's very, very big, so that's an achievement. But not only did it put it in orbit, but it sent a crew up to make sure it got where it needed to go and was up and running properly. But Hubble isn't the only significant payload carried by the Space Shuttle. The Space Shuttle would also be used to launch interplanetary missions, even though there wasn't a ton of them. Notably the Galileo, Magellan, and Ulysses missions, which went to the outer planets. The shuttle would also carry the Mir docking converter, which would be added to the Mir space station. The shuttle's missions to Mir in general were some of the most important space flights for international cooperation, and they laid the groundwork for the International Space Station. Which brings you to probably the most significant achievement of the Space Shuttle, and that is the Space Shuttle's contributions to the International Space Station itself. A vast majority of the components of the International Space Station were launched on the Space Shuttle. The entire US segment of the International Space Station, as well as the segments flown by our partners, were launched on the Space Shuttle. On top of that, all of the segments that make up the truss, the giant, cross beam with the solar panels on the end of it, those were all also flown on the back of the Space Shuttle. The Space Shuttle gave the capability of launching space station components that didn't have to have their own maneuvering system like the Russian segment components had to have. This allowed the US segments to be larger and more roomier than their Russian counterparts. And since they could be flown to the station on the back of the shuttle and docked with the robotic arm, they didn't even need to have the systems to dock themselves to the station. And not only did it carry the components that built the station, but it carried people to and from the station for basically the last decade that the shuttle was flying. From 2000 to 2011, it shuttled people and cargo to and from the International Space Station. So by far, its largest contribution was to the International Space Station, which is still obviously playing a role today in space exploration and will play a significant role in the future of manned exploration in space. The installation the shuttle helped build will play a pivotal role in learning how to live and work in space for long periods of time, something that is absolutely crucial if we're going to go to Mars and other destinations all across the solar system. But if you want to know more about how the shuttle worked, how it got to orbit in the first place, I'll leave a link up in one of the corners to my video covering the basics of how they flew the Space Shuttle. And I want you to tell me down below in the comments, is there anything that you want to know about spaceflight? Do you have questions about the shuttle or about anything in general related to spaceflight? Leave them down below and I'll try my best to either answer them in the comments or who knows, it might be the topic of my next video. So for Spaceflight Made Simple, I'm Colin and I will see you next time.